Picture a Roman battlefield. The ground shakes with the measured, terrifying tread of the legions. Shields are locked, a tortoise shell of painted wood and iron. Javelins, the deadly pila, are raised, a forest of steel-tipped wood awaiting the command to fly. It is an image of brute force, close-quarters power that has defined Roman warfare in the popular imagination for 2 millennia. But look closer. Something is missing. Where are the dense ranks of bowmen? Where is the hail of arrows darkening the sky before the clash of infantry, a scene so common in depictions of Greek, Persian, or medieval warfare? Why would the most powerful and adaptive military machine in the ancient world seem to neglect one of history's oldest and most pervasive weapons? The question itself is a kind of myth. Did the Romans not use archers? The simple, stark answer is yes, of course they did. But the real story is one of cultural hesitation, pragmatic adaptation, and ultimate, wholesale integration. The bow in Roman warfare didn't have a static role. Its journey is a mirror reflecting the evolution of Rome itself, from a regional power obsessed with citizen infantry ideals to a sprawling republic leveraging foreign specialists to an empire formally institutionalizing them and finally to a late antique state whose survival depended on mastering the very missile tactics it once viewed with skepticism. In this exploration, we will trace that epic development. We'll uncover who Rome's archers were, often not Romans at all. We'll examine the weapons they used, from simple self-bows to sophisticated composite recurves. We'll analyze how they were deployed on the battlefield, from marginal skirmishers to battle-winning cavalry. And we'll decipher the why, the complex interplay of tradition, threat, and innovation that gradually, irresistibly, moved the bow from the fringes to the very heart of Roman military practice. Our story begins in the midst of Rome's formative years, the semi-legendary kingdom and the gritty, struggling early republic, c. 8th to 4th centuries BC. Direct archaeological evidence for dedicated Roman archer units in this period is, unsurprisingly, scant. Roman warfare, as described by later historians like Livy, was a matter of citizen farmers forming up with shield, spear, and sheer determination. But absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, especially of a technology as fundamental as the bow. We must look to Rome's neighbors and influencers. To the north, the sophisticated Etruscans, from whom Rome borrowed so much in religion, art, and architecture, were proficient archers. Etruscan art frequently depicts the bow used in hunting and in war. It is inconceivable that this knowledge did not seep into early Latin society. Indeed, the bow held a sacred place in early Roman religion. Diana, the huntress, was a goddess of the woodlands and the bow. Apollo, introduced early from Greece, was also an archer deity. The weapon was woven into the fabric of their spiritual world, suggesting a familiar, if not predominantly martial, tool. Yet, when the early Roman legio took shape, the bow was conspicuously absent from its core toolkit. Why? The answer lies in a confluence of sociology, geography, and borrowed doctrine. The warfare of the early and mid-republic was dominated by the decisive clash of heavy infantry. Initially, Romans fought in a hoplite phalanx, a borrowing from the Greek colonies of Magna Graecia in southern Italy. This was a close-order formation where discipline, shield wall integrity, and the final thrust of the spear won the day. Later, with the Seminole reforms likely associated with the Samnite Wars, they developed the more flexible manipular legion. Now the weapon was the gladius, sword, and the pilum, javelin. The light skirmishers of the early legion, the velites, were young, swift soldiers who carried javelins and small shields. Sometimes they used slings. But notably, the sources do not describe them as archers. The reason was practical. Central and southern Italy was not a region with a strong, native tradition of mass military archery. The hilly terrain and the type of conflicts, often against other Italic peoples with similar infantry-centric armies, did not demand it. Rome couldn't levy thousands of proficient bowmen from its own citizenry because those skills simply didn't exist at scale. So, when they needed ranged support, they outsourced it. They relied on socii, allies, from regions famous for specific skills. The Balearic Islanders provided legendary slingers. Certain Italian tribes provided nimble javelin men. Archers, if they appeared at all in these early armies, were rare, foreign curiosities, perhaps small contingents from allied communities or hired mercenaries from the very fringes of the Italian world. Beneath this practicality, however, thrummed a cultural attitude. The Roman ideal of virtus, manly courage, was intimately tied to facing your enemy eye to eye. It was about standing your ground in the line, about the brutal, intimate work of the sword. This was an ethos shared with their Greek cultural forebears. The poet Archilochus's disdain for the long-haired archer who trusts in his bow had a Roman echo. To kill from a distance could be seen as cowardly, deceptive, even un-Roman. The Roman military writer Vigetius, though writing much later in the 4th century AD, channeled this ancient prejudice when he remarked that the legionaries, by hurling their pila in a unified volley just before contact, seemed to supply the place of archers. In other words, their own system made dedicated bowmen seem redundant. He further criticized foot archers, asking rhetorically, what can be expected from a foot archer, without a cuirass or helmet, who cannot hold at once his bow and shield? Thus, in the early Roman psyche and military system, the archer was a peripheral figure, a foreign auxiliary, a hunter, a religious symbol, but not the embodiment of Roman martial might. That honor belonged solely to the legionary. As the Republic flexed its muscles beyond the Italian peninsula, beginning in the 3rd century BC, this insular view collided with a wider, more dangerous world. Rome now faced enemies for whom the bow was not a secondary tool, but a primary instrument of war. The first major shock came during the Punic Wars, particularly against Hannibal. While Carthaginian armies were not defined by archery, they did employ them, and more importantly, Rome now fought in theaters like Spain and North Africa where local skirmishers used bows effectively. But the true classroom was the Hellenistic East. When Roman legions marched into Greece and Anatolia, they confronted the successor kingdoms of Alexander's empire. These kingdoms fielded combined arms armies that included dense blocks of pikemen, heavy cavalry, and significant contingents of archers and slingers. Roman generals, ever pragmatic, responded not by trying to train their citizens en masse, but by doing what they had always done, hiring specialists. The 2nd century BC saw the widespread use of mercenary archers, most famously from Crete. The Cretans were the snipers of the ancient Mediterranean, renowned for the accuracy and power of their shot. Their reputation was such that Cretan archer became almost a synonym for mercenary, and not always a flattering one. They were also known for being treacherous. But their utility was undeniable. A Roman army lacking inherent missile troops could, for the right price, rent a battalion of the best in the world. This outsourcing became formalized with the Marian reforms around 107 BC. When Gaius Marius abolished the citizen velites, he effectively made the Roman legion a pure heavy infantry force. All light troops and missile support would now have to come from non-legionaries. This created a permanent, structural demand for specialists like archers. The late Republican armies of Sulla, Pompey, and Caesar were thus accompanied by a motley assortment of mercenary and allied archers from Crete, Numidia, and the Levant. Julius Caesar's commentaries provide a crystal-clear window into this utilitarian relationship. In his Gallic Wars, Caesar occasionally mentions using archers, usually Cretans and Numidians. He employs them in classic supporting roles, guarding the flanks of his legions on the march, screening the construction of siege works, and most effectively, defending his own fortifications. At the Siege of Alesia, his archers, positioned in wooden towers, played a crucial role in repelling Vercingetorix's massive relief attacks, shooting down into the packed ranks of Gauls. The civil war against Pompey highlighted the bow's growing importance. Pompey, drawing on his extensive client networks in the east, amassed a huge force of archers and slingers for the climactic Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BC. Plutarch describes how these thousands of bowmen poured arrows into Caesar's advancing lines, causing significant casualties and disruption. It was a demonstration that archery, on a large scale, could be a battle-winning arm. Caesar prevailed through superior infantry tactics and his reserve line, but the lesson was etched in blood: ignore missile troops at your peril. The most devastating lesson, however, came a few years earlier, and it was a lesson in mounted archery. In 53 BC, the ambitious triumvir Marcus Crassus invaded the Parthian Empire. At the Battle of Carrhae, his army of over 40,000 legionaries was surrounded by a far smaller but infinitely more mobile Parthian force composed almost entirely of horse archers and heavily armored cataphracts. The Parthians employed the classic Parthian shot tactic, feigning retreat, then twisting in the saddle to loose arrows backwards with terrifying accuracy. The Roman infantry, without adequate cavalry or their own long-range missiles, were turned into a helpless, bleeding pincushion. Crassus was killed, and his standards captured in one of the most humiliating defeats in Roman history. Carrhae was a traumatic wake-up call. It starkly revealed the limitations of an army that could only fight well within a range of 30 paces. The Republic, in its final decades, began to adapt. The need for dedicated, organic archer units, both foot and horse, became a strategic imperative, not just a tactical convenience. With the chaos of civil war ending and the imperial system forged by Augustus after 27 BC, the Roman army was professionalized, standardized, and put on a permanent footing. This included the auxiliary forces, the auxilia. No longer just ad hoc allies or mercenaries, auxiliaries became a standing, professional corps of non-citizens serving for 25 years with the promise of Roman citizenship upon discharge. And within this corps, archers found their formal, lasting home. Dedicated archer units were called cohorts sagittarium, foot archer cohorts, and aeli sagittarium, mounted archer wings. The early empire, 1st and 2nd centuries AD, saw these units stationed across the frontiers. Roughly 2/3 of imperial archers were infantry, 1/3 cavalry, a balance reflecting the need for both static defense and mobile response. Recruitment patterns tell a clear story of specialization. While Crete still supplied some archers, the epicenter of recruitment shifted decisively to the eastern provinces, where archery was deeply ingrained in the culture. Syria, Commagene, Anatolia, and Thrace became the primary nurseries of Rome's archers. By the mid-2nd century, of the 32 known auxiliary units titled Sagittari, only one was Cretan. The vast majority were Syrian or from neighboring eastern peoples. The typical Roman archer of this era was not an Italian, but a Syrian, a Palestinian, or an Anatolian, serving Rome in exchange for pay, land, and eventual citizenship. Their weapon of choice was the composite recurve bow. This was a technological marvel of layered wood, horn, and sinew, glued under tension. When unstrung, it curved away from the archer, a recurve. When strung, it formed a powerful, compact shape that stored immense energy for its size. This was a weapon born on the steppes of Central Asia, perfected by the Parthians and Scythians, and eagerly adopted by the Romans for its superior power and range compared to simple wooden self-bows. Archaeological evidence is widespread. Bone and horn laths, the rigid tips and gripped sections of composite bows, have been found from Hadrian's Wall in damp Britain to the deserts of Syria. The famous wooden tablets from Vindolanda on the British frontier even include requests for supplies of sinew and horn for bow maintenance, proving these complex weapons were manufactured and repaired even in the empire's remotest corners. Visual evidence brings these troops to life. Trajan's Column in Rome, a monumental narrative of the Dacian Wars, 101 to 106 AD, is a gallery of Roman military life. Among the legionaries in their segmented armor are archers dressed differently. They wear pointed or conical helmets of Eastern design, scale armor cuirasses, and often long-sleeved tunics and trousers, racy, distinctly un-Roman garb to the toga-clad citizens back home. They are shown drawing powerful composite bows, sometimes in action alongside slingers and artillery crews. Art historians universally identify them as Syrian auxiliaries. Roman militaries thinking about archery also became sophisticated. They understood that the arrowhead was as important as the bow. For use against unarmored or lightly armored foes like Germanic or Celtic warriors, they employed broad, triangular heads with vicious cutting edges, designed to cause horrific, debilitating wounds. Conversely, to tackle armored opponents like the Parthian or later Sasanian cataphracts, they stocked supplies of narrow, pyramidal bodkin points, engineered like armor-piercing rounds to punch through mail or scale. In battle, imperial archers were integrated into a combined arms system. Their primary role was softening up. A common tactic was to position cohorts of foot archers just behind the front legionary line. As the enemy advanced, these archers would loose volleys at a high angle, creating a rain of arrows that fell on the approaching formation. This wasn't necessarily about killing vast numbers, though that was a bonus. It was about disruption. Arrows clattering on shields, finding gaps in armor, wounding men, and most importantly, breaking the enemy's nerve and cohesion. By the time the opposing line reached the Roman pila volley and the grim wall of Scuta and Gladii, they were already disorganized and demoralized. They could also be used more aggressively. During the First Jewish-Roman War, the future Emperor Vespasian and his son Titus made extensive use of archers in urban fighting. At the Siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD, the historian Josephus describes Roman archers being used as sharpshooters and suppressing forces. They would hold the ends of streets, pinning down Jewish defenders on rooftops and in alleyways with aimed fire, allowing legionaries to advance and assault barricades. This was archery as intimate, decisive combat support. In siege warfare, their role was indispensable. While ballistas and onagers provided heavy bombardment, archers were the suppressive fire. They would advance in cover to within range of a fort's walls, their arrows forcing defenders to keep their heads down, making it perilous to man the battlements. This arrow cover was critical for the safe approach of siege towers, battering rams, and working parties filling ditches. Yet, a status distinction remained. The archer, for all his utility, was still an auxiliary. He was not the backbone of the army, that was still the legionary citizen. He was a vital specialist, respected for his skill, but operating within a military culture whose heart still beat to the rhythm of the infantry advance. The 3rd century AD brought a crisis that would shatter old paradigms and force a revolutionary reimagining of the Roman army. This period, from the crisis of the 3rd century, 235 to 284 AD, through the fall of the West and into the height of the Byzantine Empire, witnessed the Bau's final and complete ascendance. The external pressures were existential. In the east, the new Sasanian Persian Empire was a far more formidable foe than the Parthians, fielding even heavier cavalry and massed, disciplined horse archers. On the Danube and Rhine frontiers, new confederations of Germanic tribes applied constant pressure. And then, from the depths of Central Asia, came the ultimate challenge, the Huns. These nomadic warriors were the epitome of mounted archery, living on horseback and capable of unleashing staggering volumes of arrows with uncanny accuracy while moving at full gallop. Against such enemies, the classic legionary line was often too slow, too static, too vulnerable. The Roman response was a total military overhaul, pioneered by emperors like Gallienus, Diocletian, and Constantine. The old frontier legions were broken up into smaller, static garrison forces, limitanii. The strategic offensive power was invested in new, highly mobile field armies, comitatenses. And these armies had a drastically different composition, a much higher proportion of cavalry, and within that cavalry, a massive increase in mounted archers. The late Roman army didn't just use horse archers, it became dependent on them. Recruitment shifted again. Now, they actively recruited the very peoples they fought. Huns, Alans, Goths, and Sarmatians were enlisted as foederati, allied troops, or integrated directly into regular units. A Roman cavalryman of the 4th or 5th century was as likely to be a Goth with a composite bow as an Italian with a lance. The bureaucratic document known as the Notitia Dignitatum, c. 400 AD, offers a snapshot. It lists dozens of units with the title Sagittarii, and they are overwhelmingly concentrated in the Eastern Empire and in North Africa, the very fronts facing Persia and nomadic incursions. The distribution speaks volumes. Where the threat was most mounted and missile-oriented, the Roman answer was the same. Technology evolved in tandem. The Romans adopted the asymmetric Hunnic bow, where the upper limb was longer than the lower, optimizing the geometry for shooting from horseback. Advances in saddle design, specifically the four-horned Roman saddle, and later the stirrup, though its widespread use as post-Western Empire, gave cavalry unprecedented stability, turning a mounted archer from a skirmisher into a stable firing platform even at the gallop. By the 5th century, the transformation was complete. The writer Vigetius, in his aforementioned manual, lamented the decline of infantry drill and the old ways, but his nostalgia was for a bygone era. In the field, the reality was described by historians like Ammianus Marcellinus and, later, the Byzantine Procopius. Procopius, writing in the 6th century about the wars of Justinian, states plainly that the core of the Roman, now Byzantine, army was its cavalry, and the primary weapon of that cavalry was the bow. These were no longer auxiliary supports, they were the main striking force, using complex tactics of feigned retreat, envelopment, and combined arrow/lance charges that would have been utterly alien to a Republican consul. The Western Roman Empire may have fallen in 476 AD, but its eastern half, the Byzantine Empire, carried this legacy forward for nearly 1,000 more years. The Byzantine cataphract and later the Klebanophoros were the ultimate fusion of the Roman legionary and the steppe horse archer, heavily armored knights who were also masters of the composite bow. The circle was closed. The army that once had no archers had become an army defined by them. So, why does the persistent myth of the archerless Roman endure? It stems from a fixation on Rome's golden age, the Republic and early Empire, when the iconic image of the legionary was forged. In that period, archers were marginal, foreign, and auxiliary. They were not the face of Roman power. The cultural memory, reinforced by Hollywood and popular art, latched onto that iconic infantryman and never let go. But as we've seen, to claim Romans didn't use archers is to tell only the first chapter of a very long book. The Roman relationship with the bow is a masterclass in military adaptation. They began with a cultural and practical disinterest. When faced with enemies who used the bow effectively, they pragmatically hired the best archers money could buy. Then, they formally institutionalized those foreign specialists into the standing army. Finally, confronted with existential threats whose entire way of war was built around mounted archery, they transformed their own military doctrine, recruitment, and technology to not just counter it, but to master and embody it. The true lesson of the Roman archer is the lesson of Rome itself: inflexible dogma dies. Pragmatic adaptation survives. The Romans didn't reject the bow out of ignorance or stubborn pride. They initially didn't need it to achieve their goals. But when the world changed, they changed with it. They proved that the essence of Roman military genius was not the sword or the javelin in isolation, but the unwavering will to incorporate any tool, any tactic, and any warrior that would ensure victory and perpetuate the empire. From the mercenary Cretan on the dusty plains of Greece to the Hunnic horse archer in the service of a Byzantine emperor, the story of the bow is, in the end, a profound testament to Roman resilience. If you found this deep dive into the evolution of Roman warfare compelling, please consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications. We have many more documentaries upcoming, where we'll dissect the tactics, weaponry, and daily realities that shaped the ancient world. Thank you for watching.